Blueberry pancake mead. Yes, we're going to make a mead today that tastes like blueberry pancakes. I'm Phil. This is Phil with Facts, and today we are making Acerglyn mead. So today we're making an Acerglyn, which is a mead made with both honey and maple syrup. Now it's important to think about that for a second, because it's a mead. So by default, a mead needs to be at least 51% fermented honey, which means you have to have more honey than maple syrup in the fermentation. Now, if you just really want to make a maple wine, you can. Just substitute all the honey we use for maple syrup. You're going to get a different product, but you're going to get a more maple forward product. Now, when I think of Acerglyn and I think of a maple mead, I do want it to have a more pronounced maple flavor. However, fermenting maple syrup takes away a lot of those nuances, takes away some of those nuances that you would have expected to get from the Acerglyn. So for all intents and purposes, this is going to be a maple forward mead. However, we're going to back sweeten with maple syrup for secondary after fermentation is done, which means we're going to add more maple syrup later on, but we still fermented more honey than maple, which is going to keep it a maple mead or an Acerglyn. I've probably already lost you, and I apologize for that. But let's move forward, because there's a lot more to go over today. I want to make a mead that tasted like blueberry pancakes. Now, Acerglyn was a clear knockout, home run. This is what you need to do to get that result. The other thing we need is blueberries. And I struggled with this part for a second. Normally, when I use frozen fruit, I try to use closer to 3 pounds per gallon, because that's how you get the most fruit flavor out of them for a mead. However, I don't want this to be all blueberries with a little bit of maple syrup. That's not really what we were going for. So I'm scaling back the blueberries just a little bit so that we can get more maple and less blueberry. That's the thought process behind it, and I think we're on the right track. So with that said, let's start making this mead. As always, any equipment I use today has been sanitized. Use any food grade safe sanitizer you have access to. I'm using Star San. It's a Star San solution which I put into a big tub, and I keep it off screen because it's huge and would have no, well, you just wouldn't be able to see anything, and that wouldn't be good television, would it? Quick little tea break, and we move forward. Now the first thing I'm going to do is weigh out 1.5 pounds of honey. In total fermentable sugars, I want a little over 2.5 pounds. I'm taking into mind that some of the sugars in the blueberries will be in solution, but might not come into the gravity. So we're not going to worry about those. And with the yeast I'm using today, the tolerance will be fine. So I'm not too worried about it. I'm going to take a scale. Yeah, I actually own one, and I can use it occasionally. Normally I try to buy honey that's around the volume. Normally I try to buy honey that's around the volume I need for the meat itself, so I don't have to measure it as much. But today I'm going to measure it. Alright, slight change of plans. It occurs to me now that I really only need to weigh out 1/2 pound of honey. And I need to weigh out 1 pound of maple syrup. Because the other honey is a full jar. It's a 1 pound of honey. And I'm going to need to add some water to get all that honey out. At that point, I won't be able to measure or weigh any of it. So I'm tearing my scale, and I'm literally just going to add 1 pound of maple syrup. Maple syrup pours so much easier than honey. Like, I don't know. Just made my life a whole lot easier. Now, I'm going to add the rest of my honey. All right, there we go. So all of our fermentable sugars, most of our fermentable sugars, are now in the fermenter. Next thing we're going to do is add the blueberries. Now, these should be defrosted by now. They've been in my fridge for about a day and a half. And I do recommend using, as always, store-bought frozen fruit or fresh fruit that you grew in your own garden and you got from a really reliable source. But then freeze it first. It just helps break the cell walls down and get all that extra stuff out of the fruit. It could still work with fresh fruit, but why not just freeze it and defrost it? It doesn't take that much more time. And we're going to just dump it right out of the pack today and try to get every single one in all that little bit of juice. And they're pretty good. They're not really frozen anymore. There's nothing wrong if they were still more frozen. It's not going to hurt the brew. It might slow the yeast down at the beginning while they come to temp in the liquid. That's really it. So now we got all this gooey goodness in this fermenter. I'm going to add a little bit of water. Now the water I'm using today is around 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's intentional. It's going to cool down because of the blueberries, and we're not pitching yeast right away. And even if we did, 90 degrees isn't going to hurt your yeast. But what it is going to do at this temperature is loosen the honey and make it a lot easier to incorporate. I'm also going to take 2 seconds to remove my scale because I no longer need it, and I don't want to keep all that weight on it the entire time we're making our beverage. Between the blueberries and the maple, this is going to be a really fun colored mead. It's going to have really a vibrant color at the end of it, I'm sure. Now you want to get the sides, you want to make sure you get the center, you want to mix up everything. If it isn't fully incorporated, the only thing you're going to do is throw off your original gravity, which is not the end of the world. It's just you're not going to have the right information, which sucks, but it's not going to destroy the brew. Believe it or not, the yeast will just consume any sugars in here, no matter what you do to them. So you want to just not mix, put everything in at the beginning and go for it? You can. While we're stirring, I'm going to take this time to add 3 adjuncts that I feel this particular mead is going to need. The first one is, and it helps if you don't cover your notes with a tea mug. Alright, so half a tablespoon of yeast nutrients. I'm using Fermex. It's what I've been using for a while. I bought a big bag a long time ago, and now I have it. If there's a different yeast nutrients you want to use for your brew, you can. Use whatever you're comfortable with yeast nutrient-wise, but just use the package instructions per gallon. You don't want to use my recipe and then use a different nutrient because you don't really know how much your yeast is going to need of that nutrient, and you don't want to undersell it or oversell it or however that case may be. Go right in. I'm going to add half a teaspoon of red wine tannin. And these cups are awesome, by the way. So I bought these silicone cups on Amazon. Besides the fact that they're really fun colors, they're great for adding nutrients to your mead. They're flexible, so you can literally just make a little funnel, add it right in. They're microwave safe. They're silicone and they clean easy. So I just love them. I think they make brew day a little bit easier, and I'm just throwing it out there. The last thing I'm going to add is half a teaspoon of pectic enzyme. Now, I could go for a quarter, so I'm actually doubling it for this. And with the volume of blueberries, you don't really need to. I've just learned that half a teaspoon in a gallon batch really just extracts a little bit more and helps it clear just a little bit faster. They're not going to change the volume of the liquid, and they're not going to change the gravity reading, but while I'm mixing now, why not? Right? Make your life a little bit easier. This is brew day. There's a lot going on. And if you can make your life a little bit easier during it, then I think it's about time you do it. All right, now we're going to add the rest of our water. And because of the blueberries and the honey and the maple syrup, I'm expecting an aggressive fermentation. So I'm only going to go to about a little bit more, and stop. That's it. That's all I'm willing to go. Giving it plenty of room for the beginning stages of fermentation. It's going to create the chrysin line. It's going to bubble up. It's going to foam. I don't feel like cleaning this mess up 3 or 4 times over the next 2 days. So I'm going to cut it just a little early. This is a very large fermenter, and we're still going to end up with about a gallon of product after we take everything out. So I'm not too worried about it. Now I'm just mixing it a little bit more, only so that I can get an accurate gravity reading. And let's just go on and do that. And we're looking at a 1.080 original gravity, which might be a good thing to write down. Now, at a 1.080, we can pretty much figure out what our potential alcohol is going to be. I'm going to take the original gravity, 1.080, I'm going to minus what I'm expecting the final gravity to be, which would be a 1.000, and then I'm going to times that by 132. That's going to give me this number right here, and I'd be happy with that in an Acerglyn. Let's add back our sample. You can try it if you want. I wouldn't. It's just going to be sickeningly sweet at this point and not really enjoyable. And the only thing I think we have left to add is the yeast. A quick note on the yeast. Today I'm using Premier Roger by Red Star. It's a red wine yeast. It's a really good yeast for extracting colors from fruits during fermentation, which is awesome. It means it's probably going to keep some of that purpley color from the blueberry in the final product, which I think is going to look great in a glass. Acerglyns to me drink a little bit more like a dry red wine, unless you super sweeten it with more maple syrup. Now I am going to back sweeten it a little bit, but I still think that this is the right yeast for this job. When you're picking out yeast for your brews, you have to think of a couple things. What am I brewing? What gravity am I trying to reach in this brew? And then what esters do I want? And then you kind of have to do some research. Now, in general, you can just buy online in bulk 1 or 2 different types of yeast that will suit most of your brew needs. And in that case, just use that for this. It will work. I tend to keep 71B around for that same reason. I have a bunch of packets of it. It's a reliable yeast, and it goes to 16% ABV. So in most cases, if I don't have a yeast for what I'm thinking about brewing, that one will do the trick. In this case, I bought a bunch of the little sample packets of Red Star, so I got all 3 varieties a couple different times over. And it's really been helping me come up with some fun, different ideas for brews and knowing what to expect from the final product. Now we're going to open it. It helps if you have a knife for some packets. And after the battle of the yeast packet, you're ready to just add it right in. Make sure you get every little drop. They love to stick into the packet, and if they're in the packet, they're not fermenting your brew. Give it a couple more good stirs, just to make sure everything is still mixed in. Let the yeast get around, start doing what they're going to do. And then the only other thing you have to add is the cap. Now, I fill my airlocks with Star San, the diluted one, the same one I sanitize everything in. It's just a little extra layer of protection. You can use water, but it's not going to kill anything that gets into the airlock. And you can use a hard liquor that you have that maybe you don't enjoy drinking as much, or maybe you have like some of that cheap vodka laying around. Just a little bit. You only need a couple of teaspoons just to get the airlock going. And Basically, let it do its thing. What it's going to do is, as you're fermenting, all the CO2 you create is going to want to leave. So it's going to come through the airlock and be able to escape. Without an airlock, if you just seal it at this point, you're creating a time bomb and you don't know the answer to it. At some point, it's going to shatter. Because as thick as this glass is, a lot of pressure builds up during fermentation and it needs a place to escape. The airlock will allow it to escape, but what it will not do is allow other things to come in. Bugs are going to love this. I mean, physical bugs like fruit flies, ants. This is a super sugary beverage. That is their jam. They're going to flock right to it. They can't get through this. Also, microbes. You want a very controlled environment during fermentation. You want to know that only your yeast are in here. Well, I guess the pectic enzyme as well, but you controlled what went into your brew. You want to maintain that control over your brew during and after fermentation. It's not cheap and it is time consuming to make a brew. So you want to give it the best chance to come out the way you want it. And having those little control factors are the perfect way to do it. Airlocks are great for that. Now, fermentation should start up, depending on where you live, your climate, all that stuff, within, could be 2 hours from now, could be 24 hours from now. If a couple days go by and it looks exactly like this and there's no airlock activity, and you open it and there's no foam, maybe try a different yeast packet. You might have had too many dead yeast. Maybe it was a little too old. It just never got started. That happens from time to time. But in most cases, it should start right up, and fermentation should only take about a week or two to eat all those sugars. I'm now going to put a label on this, which is going to be the name, Acerglyn. I should put blueberry too. I think it's obvious, but you never know. And again, you can forget things within a couple days. So like 2 weeks from now, you might not know the very specifics of what you put in here. That's why I recommend take good notes and keep a log of all your brews somewhere. This way you know, okay, this one already has red wine tan in it. This one already had this much pectic enzyme in it. For the label itself, you can keep it a little bit more vague. Just the name of the brew, the original gravity, and then today's date. And I love using blue painter's tape for labels. I'm a big fan of it now. It's really all I do now. And it's because I can put it onto my glass right now. If I need to, I can take it off. I can stick it to another surface so I have access to it if I need it. I can make more notes, put it back on. And at the end of the day, I'm not peeling a label off of a glass fermenter. There's like a special feeling to that after you do it the first couple of times. And you're sitting there scrubbing and scrubbing and trying to get all the little glue off and you're taking a razor to it. It's a lot of hassle. So now I just use blue painter tape. Unless I'm making a fancy label for a bottle that I'm planning to give away as a gift or I want to have for my collection, that's a different story. But for the actual fermenters, for your day-to-day brewing operations, blue painter's tape. It's a lifesaver. 10 out of 10. Highly recommend. I think you should too. So that's going to ferment. It's going to take a couple weeks. Then we'll come back and we'll take a look at it and see where it's at and what we want to add to it next. But for today's purposes, that's done. If you want to see how it turns out, please think about subscribing to this page. This way you'll have access every time I post a new video, and you can check out all the other videos I have with all the other recipes. Hit that like button. It really helps me out. Lets me know that you guys are enjoying watching what I'm doing and you want to keep watching it. And if you want to see any of my other videos, I'm going to put a playlist and a video right up here so you have access to it. But that's all I have for today, guys. So I'm Phil. This is Phil with Facts. And until next time, cheers.